Hi, this is Kevin from Passion for the Word. As usual, we'll get the housekeeping out of the way. Please share our videos. If you like what we're doing, please continue praying for us. That's the biggest thing you can do for us. We've got a Facebook page. Go to it, follow it, like it. There'll be a link to that down below. If you'd like me to come speak at your church after coronavirus passes, shoot me an email, and there'll be a link down below the video for that also. Hit the notification bell. That way you don't have to wonder if you'll miss a video. It'll tell you when we have a new video out. Subscribe to our channel. That'll keep you more notified also, and it helps us out with YouTube. Sharing our videos and subscription and all those things. With YouTube, it helps promote our videos. When someone's doing a search, it puts our video a little bit farther up the ladder so people see them more often. So if you like what we're doing, those are all things that you can do to help us out. Another thing you can do, we have our t-shirts. We have plenty of these, all sizes. Any donation of $20 gets you into one t-shirt. Any donation of $35 or more gets you into two t-shirts. Again, if you're interested in one of those, send us a comment or an email, whatever, and we'll get that taken care of for you. Now, today's video is one that I've been really looking forward to. We're not going to cover all the aspects of it because it is a huge topic. It's a little off the Bible. It's more into the science realm of things. It's life coming from non-life. Satan doesn't care what you believe as long as it's not the truth. Anything but the truth, he wins. Science has confirmed more than once that life can't come from non-life. There's nothing in science to suggest that life can come from non-life. Yet atheists and people that believe in evolution insist that life came from non-life. It's a fantasy. It's beyond science fiction. Star Wars and Star Trek are massively more believable than life coming from non-life. And we're going to look at that a little bit. Now, one of the areas that we're not going to get into a whole lot just because of the size of it is the tremendous odds against, you've got amino acids becoming proteins, proteins becoming DNA. Of the different amino acids, there's only a small handful that can actually be used. There's left-handed and right-handed. Only left-handed work. The right-handed was just getting in the way. There was a big experiment by two guys, Miller-Urey, and they tried to tout, look, we came so close to creating life in the laboratory. All they did is created amino acids. That would be like hand carving a bolt and then trying to proclaim, look, I built a car, almost. It's that far from the truth. Again, we're looking at desperation. When you're that desperate for evidence, that you'll call that evidence, it shows how weak your case is. The likelihood of developing DNA, or self-replicating strand of DNA, randomly, is so incredibly remote. There was an atheistic statistician who did this. He figured up, and you got to remember, he was working for the other side. He figured the likelihood of a self-replicating strand of DNA magically producing itself in nature with no design, no intelligence, no assistance of any sort, just putting itself together in a water puddle, or a puddle of water, mud puddle, was about the equivalent of a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling a fully functioning 747. The lottery has much better odds than this happening. That's not even life. That's just a DNA strand. So it is so far from the truth. So we're not going to get into the DNA end of it because like I said, that's a huge area. We'll do another video on that at some point. We're going to cover some other areas. The first concept we're going to cover is irreducible complexity. Now, the classic illustration for this is a mousetrap. Any functioning mousetrap has 5 parts. It has a base, a hammer that actually that kills the mouse, a spring that sends the hammer forward, a hold down that holds the hammer in place till it's ready, and then a catch that when tripped releases the hold down. Now, this is a little bit more modern version of a mouse trap. I'll tell you, if you got a mouse problem, these are the best mouse traps. We live out in the country, we have livestock, rodents are a problem. They reset very easily. You take away any one of these 5 parts, this becomes worthless. You take the spring away, this thing can't kill. You take the hammer away, what good is it? Now, the atheists will try in their desperation to say, well, you can get rid of the base by attaching it to the floor. It's still a base. The floor has now become the base. Others will try to say, well, I could file the spring so that it has a catch in it or a hold it. You need all 5 functions. Even if you make one piece double. I mean, with the old wooden style mousetrap, the spring and the hammer are technically the same piece of wire, but they have a separate function, a separate area. The hammer without a spring is worthless. The spring without a hammer is worthless. The entire mousetrap falls apart if all 5 functions aren't there right from the get-go. You can't work your way into this. They all have to be there at the beginning. Now we're going to back up to Darwin a little bit with his theory, and that's a poor word for it, but a theory of evolution. Darwin can at least be excused because at his time we had, one of my dogs freaking out, we had very low quality microscopes, and when we looked at a cell, we basically saw a blob. We really couldn't identify it, so he can be excused. Today, our science is so much greater. Our microscopes are vastly superior to the microscopes available in Darwin's day. We know that the cell is not just simple little blob. I mean, it's just ridiculous. This is just a basic cell. And this doesn't go into a lot of detail, but this shows all that's in that cell. This cell cannot live, cannot function without all of that. It's irreducible complexity, but a far more complex organism. Not only that, but the first cell to pop up, let's say some magic puddle eons ago, the chemicals got together, the rains hit the rock and put the chemicals together. They created the amino acids, and they created the proteins, and they created the DNA. And the amazing thing is, the proteins you need to make DNA are only made in DNA. So where'd they come from? They've got several real serious chicken and egg problems. They need the DNA to make the protein, but they can't make the DNA till they have the protein. Where did it start? So you've got this very complicated cell. A lot of people, I've heard it said that a cell is more complicated than any complete factory out there. Now you notice down here we got cilia. Cilia and flagellum are very similar. Flagellum are just a little bit more complicated, but just to show the level of complexity here, you see all this, and this is complex enough. You pull any of that out, and this is just a cartoon drawing. The actual cell is far more complicated. We're going to examine a flagellum, which is just a little branch that sticks. It's what the cell uses to maneuver. Typically, if a cell has cilia, they have a bunch of them. If it's flagellum, they have fewer. But the flagellum is extremely interesting. And remember, this is just one part of this entire cell. The flagellum literally has a complete motor. It has stators, it has armatures, it has bearings, it has a drive shaft, it has the filament that comes out. This thing is an amazing function. You take away one part of this, the whole thing falls apart. What good is all this if it doesn't have the filament? What good is it if you've got the filament but nothing to drive it, and it needs all the parts to drive it? This is a liquid-cooled motor beyond microscopic in size. Amazing technology. This motor can spin at 10,000 RPM. It can switch directions in a quarter of a turn. 10,000 RPMs, stop and go the other direction in a quarter of a turn. And this is how cells, many cells, not all cells, but many cells, push themselves around. This is the same irreducible complexity that you have with the mousetrap. This whole thing had to come to be in one step. You can't do it one step at a time. It can't evolve. Just like the cell. The cell can't evolve because the nucleus is no good without the other parts. The other parts are no good. They all had to come to be at the same time. So the miracle that they're asking for, that they're trying to claim happened, is some puddle somewhere, all the chemicals got together, created proteins that could only be, well, created amino acids, then created proteins that could only be created by DNA, but somehow they were created this time without DNA. Then the proteins put the DNA together, millions of strands of information. In some cases, only one needs to be wrong for it to be fatal. This self-replicating DNA strand got it right, and in one step produced a cell, a fully functioning cell with all these things working the first time. Because if anything's missing, it dies and you got to start over. The whole process has to start over. And then to top it off, this cell had to appear in an environment conducive to life and close enough to a food source that it could eat before it died. Satan doesn't care what you believe as long as it's not the truth. This is a huge untruth to swallow. But people will believe ridiculous, crazy ideas if it gets them away from having to believe the Bible and all the thou shalt nots in the Bible. So we've got the animal cell, we've got the flagellum. We're going to go a little deeper into another aspect of confirmed science that proves life cannot come from non-life. Now, before we get into cell theory, we're going to back up to Louis Pasteur in the mid-1800s. Before Pasteur, there was an idea called spontaneous generation. Science wasn't very strong at this time, so a lot of scientists believed that life could come from non-life, a lot like the atheists and the evolutionists today. They noticed that if you had a piece of rotting meat, maggots just appeared. If you had a dirty environment, rodents and vermin would just happen to appear, but they didn't know how. Louis Pasteur actually did science. He sealed off that meat so the flies couldn't get to it to lay the eggs. Lo and behold, no maggots appeared. He proved scientifically life did not come from non-life. Life only came from life. It's what we see everywhere. No one has ever observed life coming from non-life. To believe it can be, you can believe that if you want, but don't call it science. So here's cell theory. Now, this is a sound scientific theory. We'll contrast this at the end with evolution, the theory. There's three tenets to cell theory. The first one is all living things are made up of one or more cells. The second one is cells are the smallest unit or the basic building block of life. And three, cells can only come from pre-existing cells. Now, the reason this is still considered a theory is the only way to prove it, the only way to call this a law, is to gather up every living thing on the earth at one time and check it for cells. Well, that's just not possible. There's also the possibility that there is a life form that we haven't discovered yet that doesn't have cells. These are all highly improbable. I would say to the point of being impossible. But because science is a very accurate thing, it can't call it a law if it can't prove it. That's why this is still considered a theory. There are no observed exceptions to any one of these three. Now contrast that to evolution, that says over time, dogs came from lizards. No such thing has ever been evolved. Now they say it took place in millions of steps, millions of tiny little steps. Okay, still, no one's ever observed that. Nothing even close to that. We domesticated animals thousands of years ago. We have the number of animals that have been born in man's presence, numbers in the millions, if not billions. And in every single situation, with no exceptions, the offspring were the same species as the parents. No exceptions. The evolution does not qualify as a scientific theory. It does not live up to the same standards. Another one that I've had atheists point out to me, bring it up, and when I say, evolution is not a theory, they'll bring up gravity. Well, don't you think, what about gravity? I'll say, fine. Theory of gravity says, theory of gravity just worked right there. I take my glasses and drop them, they'll fall. I just proved the theory of gravity. You can do the same thing. Pick up any object around you, hold it up, let go, and unless it's a helium balloon, I guarantee it's going to go down. That's the theory of gravity. We may not know how gravity works exactly, but we know it does work. We can even measure it. A scale measures the amount of gravity taking effect on an item. Evolution doesn't fit that at all. It doesn't even come close. Measure evolution. Observe you can't. It's just crazy what people will believe to avoid believing the Bible. So here we've got some more solid science, but there's an even bigger one. This, you could argue, is one of the biggest science experiments ever to take place. And again, it confirms life cannot come from non-life. I do a lot of home canning. This is a jar of home canned tomatoes, or tomato juice. Anybody that does home canning, it doesn't matter if you're doing home canning or if you're in a factory or commercial environment, putting them in canned jars or bottles. Anytime you're preserving food in a container like this, you have two goals. The first is to raise the temperature inside the container to a high enough temperature to kill all the life in the jar, every last bit of it. The second thing is you want to seal it so no new life can get in it. Now within this jar are all the ingredients to life. I put the cells in there. The DNA was in there. There's still proteins and amino acids in that jar. This has it's such a huge leap forward from their imaginary magical puddle in the wild. I've got so much of the hard work already done in this. But I know that as long as I killed everything in this jar and I seal out all the new life, no new life will form, no matter how much amino acids or proteins or DNA or cells are in there. Whatever that spark is that causes a non-living thing to become a living thing will not take place in this jar. Walk through a Walmart at any time and look at all the canned food, all the sealed containers like that. Every one of them is a little tiny experiment in life not coming from non-life. If even the atheists who claim life can come from non-life don't believe it. Because if they did, they couldn't feed this to their family. They couldn't. If I had a bowl with 1 million Skittles in it, and I told you 3 of them had arsenic, how many of them would you eat? You'd pass on it. You wouldn't even mess with it. You certainly wouldn't pass it off to your children. No one has ever opened up a properly sealed container, properly canned, where all the life was killed and it was sealed off, and found new life in there. That's about as close to a confirmation as I think you could possibly get. I would suggest that this has taken place more than billions of times, probably trillions of times. I don't even know how many times a year it takes place, with 0 exceptions to the life not being able to come from non-life. It's just amazing what people will believe to avoid believing the Bible. They'll call it science, they'll call it whatever they want, but the Bible's proven true again. Science only confirms this. Thank you, God bless, and stay safe out there.